Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox, ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015, 6th edition. We are coming toward the end of Chapter 24 of 25. And Chapter 24 is on how to create and use WCF and Web API services. We've looked at the WCF side, and now it's time to look a little bit at least at the Web API. As more websites and mobile devices use AJAX to communicate with web services, two main problems with SOAP-based services have been exposed. First, SOAP requests and responses are verbose, meaning they're very wordy, leading to slower network speeds for large requests. Second, the XML returned by SOAP must be parsed before it can be used. So these REST-based web service APIs address these concerns in two ways. First, because the requests are made using the HTTP protocol, the requests and data are in the URL and HTTP request body, just like any other HTTP request. Second, in response to a REST request, usually the response is in a JSON or JavaScript object notation format, which is more compact than XML. Now you can use Web API, again API is an acronym for Application Program Interface, kind of a contract between you and the software that says the software will be provided, but you will use it in the right way. So you can use the Web API to both create and consume Web API services. This feature uses the ASP.NET Model View Controller or MVC architecture to create REST web services that can return either JSON or XML to a client. We'll talk more about Model View Controller or MVC in the next chapter, so what is shown here is just an introduction to how it can be used to develop API services. So to start a Web API service, you use the procedure shown on the screen here. This is the same procedure to use when you create any ASP.NET app, except we're choosing Web API template, the Web API template, from the New Start dialog box, as shown right here. After you create the service application, the project readme.html file is displayed, which provides information about the services and includes links for getting additional information. When you create a Web API service this way, several files and folders are created for you by default. Most of the time, you'll only work with app data, which holds your database, the models, and the controllers folders. After you add the database and the C# files to the app, you will want to develop the controller and the controllers folder, which will provide the methods for your service. One way to start the controller is to use the rename command to rename the values controller to a name that's more appropriate. When you do create a controller, you must be sure that its name ends with the word controller. So what's shown on pages 854 and 855 in figure 2410 is how to write a web services controller. Now, ASP.NET Model View Controller uses a routing framework to send incoming HTTP requests to the appropriate controller according to a predefined route pattern. For now, all you need to know is that this routing is set up for you automatically when you create the application. And the pattern is API/controller in curly braces /ID in curly braces, meaning that any URL request to the service must start with the term API and then contain the name of the controller that will handle it along with any optional ID parameter. Once the HTTP request is routed to the controller determines the action or what action method will handle it based on the HTTP verb in the request. All right, in here, what we have is we have a categories controller, I believe. Yeah. And this demonstrates one of the naming conventions used by the Web API framework. The convention is as long as your action method name starts with the same name as the HTTP verb that handles it, the controller will route that kind of request to the action method. You can have more than one action method, for a specific HTTP verb. The Web API framework expects to retrieve simple parameter types like insert strings from the URL and complex parameter types like category object from the body of the HTTP request. We have a post categories method that you see here that retrieves all the category properties from the request body. And we also have a put category that retrieves the ID property from the URL and the rest of the body. Now this gets really heavy. Again, I've used very little of this. In the next chapter, what I'm going to do is provide, hopefully in your opinion, a much more generic look at model view controller. All right. Now, as far as testing, viewing and testing a Web API service, Visual Studio doesn't provide a test mechanism for Web API services like WCF does. Remember now that REST services are accessed by using regular HTTP requests, and that means that you can test the GET methods using a browser. Now, the table that you see on the screen here shows the HTTP verbs, action methods, and URLs for the Web API category service, as well as a procedure for testing the GET methods in the browser. So in Visual Studio, you would click the browser name in the standard toolbar, then a home page, ideally like the one that's displayed on page 857 in 2411, it's something like this, is going to be shown. Okay? You can click the API link that you see up there, which will display a help page that will display the basic information about the service. All right, the last thing that's shown in this chapter is how to create a web application service that consumes a web API service. So this is pages 858, 859, 860, 861, 862, and 863. What I think I will do is just stop the lecture right here and create that as one final video. Again, I am not apologizing, but I'm just talking to you and telling you that I have very limited experience with this. I am getting more experience as time goes on. So, thank you. No, it's open. Just push it.
Okay.
Morning. No, it's not a problem.